Hello, everyone. Just doing a quick mic check, make sure everything's working before we get started, and we'll kick off this conversation very soon. So just, Avery, yeah, if you can hear me, just say
I
hi.
can hear you. Hopefully you can hear me.
Awesome. Yes, perfect. Awesome. So I know you don't have a lot of time, so let's kick it off. This is going to be one of the best, I think, conversations we have so far. So to preface it, a lot of anticipation here, no pressure. But yeah, we're combining these two of my favorite topics, AI and crypto. So yeah, great to have you here, Avery. And maybe just a quick intro for those that may not be familiar, although everyone probably should. Yeah, just give everyone a heads up.
Oh, absolutely. It's my pleasure to be here, Alejo. And, always a pleasure to join with the Pontem community and the Aptos community to discuss all topics. AI and Web3 are definitely very close to my heart. Quick background for me. I did a PhD in high performance computing back when I was at Northwestern. I went to work at Yahoo for 4 years in in the web space, working on how we took the links from the web, analyzed them, and produced interesting data sets in the webmap team, and worked on kind of precursors to Hadoop at that time. And then 2011, I went to Facebook, now Meta, obviously, to help build out the data infrastructure team, kind of growing it from 20 people to the more than 200 or 300 people that it is today. Along that way, I kind of also met a great bunch of folks who were interested in open financial platforms, and that's kind of how the Libra and the DM and Novi project started. I was very fortunate to become the early tech lead for that space, working on consensus, and then become the overall lead for blockchain at Meta, and working on the Web3 efforts there. And in 2021, I also, I met Mo along the way, who worked on the Novi side, and we kind of decided to depart Facebook in the later part of the year and launch Aptos Labs to build the technology we had started with DM, along with many of our coworkers who are very passionate about that space. And so when it comes to AI and blockchain, I think these are two areas that are very close to my heart. Working on data infrastructure at Meta gave me a lot of perspective on how how a lot of the data processing is done. I built systems, one of them called Apache Giraffe, which is a large-scale open-source graph processing platform that can do things like triangle counting, page rank, matrix factorization, and work at tremendous amount of scale to help provide recommendations for different products within Meta. And I also helped bring in adoption of Spark and helped scale Spark along with actually several members of both the team I work with at Meta as well as at Aptos to massive data sets and drive great analytics and training data for large scale learning at Meta. And so this is just an area that I'm very passionate about, and seeing these two intersections is something that is really exciting in the field.
Yeah, thank you for that intro. Very impressive background. It's really an honor to be working with you and the other folks at Aptos. Y'all have the history of literally putting together the building blocks for yes the social applications that everybody uses today, and it sounds like yeah for you even further back into the infrastructure for internet and a lot of the apps that we use today. Kind of related to that, a fun question that we can start with is, you're a contemporary to the internet, to these technologies that we use today every day. If you were a contemporary to the Wright brothers, would you have been able to foresee us going to the moon within 100 years, right? And maybe from that same perspective, what will blockchain, what will AI look like in the next 50, 100 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, AI technologies have been advancing so quickly. I mean, some people don't realize that the Transformer paper was published, quite a while back, and now with the advent of that transfer technology, laying the groundwork for things like ChatGPT and large language models, happening in the last couple of years. Sometimes it seems like there isn't a lot of progress being made in this space, but sometimes it also happens all at once when a product comes out that really revolutionizes the way people think about these technology stacks. And so it is really not easy to predict, kind of how these things will evolve. But I guess the first thing I would say is, one of the challenges of AI that's bringing into the question is around how do we recognize content today that is not going to be AI driven. It's already getting difficult, right? There are a lot of even at the lowest level, if you think about what happened in the election in 2020, Facebook had lots of information that people were viewing and following that had incorrect and misleading content out there. And it definitely must have had impact on those viewers who saw that information and maybe followed some of those and trusted some of those content posts. And maybe that's a very primitive form of kind of the deepfake technology. Today, deepfakes are becoming really, really good with the advent of things like GAN technology, where you can take neural nets and kind of train together, and then until the point at which you can't identify what's real from what's fake. It definitely ups the game in terms of any individual being able to understand and determine on their own whether this content is actual, real, or even endorsed by a particular person, or something that was kind of made up and is a different disinformation campaign going forward. And so, as we see this evolution of quality of kind of misleading or incorrect content getting more difficult to discern over time, there needs to be technologies like the blockchain that provide that basis and that ground for how do I trace lineage and provenance of content? How do we understand what people I want to stand behind, and how also how do people know that the content is something that's real, or any other kind of factors that have to do with any kind of verification of messaging around that content. And so that's why blockchain I think is getting to a point where if you have the infrastructure that can support it, let's take an example. Meta produces more than 4 billion pieces of content per day. That's just one massive internet platform out there, but there are many others. And so the amount of content that is being generated by Facebook, by Instagram, by TikTok, and by other sites like LinkedIn, Twitter, and others is massive. And for us to be able to solve this problem of how do we understand who's generating content, who wants this content to be shown and to stand behind, and also when you change your mind about things, how do you want to retract your statements or change your opinions about different types of topics, is all very, very important, I think, with respect to the fact that AI is now changing the way we think about content generation, and can kind of do all kinds of things in this space.
Yeah, that's an interesting emphasis on the dangers that we're seeing even today, right? And like you're saying, it's only going to get harder to discern what's real and what's not real in the next even like 5-10 years. And blockchain can really be a useful tool for this. And this is a pattern that I think we kind of see between these two technologies. You probably would know better, but AI kind of seems like a centralizing technology, right? We're giving Google, Apple, Meta, OpenAI, these tools that aggregate data centrally and then, compute it and tell us, what we should be thinking, or, what is real, what's not real. But blockchain is at least on principle, is a complete opposite of that, right? We're putting these servers in the hands of people all over the world, and potentially, individual users can hold their own keys and maybe in the future, have access to their own data. So yeah, kind of interesting to hear maybe some of the other use cases of how blockchain could be, a counterforce to AI, perhaps.
Absolutely. I mean, so Leo, I just want to dive a little bit deeper on what you said. I mean, I definitely agree that the way that AI technology is used today benefits those with information the most, especially those in closed information systems. I don't think it's AI itself is a technology that selects like whether it's better used for these kind of more centralized entities as opposed to decentralized. I think it's just a matter of where the data resides. And I could imagine
Yeah, that's a really good point.
in
Yeah, that's a really good point.
we have a situation where there are if we have large data open training sets and we have AI models that get trained on the data, we could also see some of those same advantages of where users are rewarded for that content and can self-select or opt out of whether they should be their content should be used for such training. I think is a really, really important future for us to consider, especially as all of us contribute data to the internet in different ways, whether it be through these social media platforms, through podcasts like we're having right now, or even through the content we generate through email or other sources, right? So blockchain is a way for us to think about how we own our own content, how what we generate is something that's controlled, authorized by us as individuals. And if we want to get permission for our content to be used for different types of services, we can do that. Also, if we want to hold out for rewards, we can do that. If we want only to be used for certain services, we can do that. And I think that control ultimately needs to reside on a place that is uncontested in terms of whether users users are giving their permission or not. And I think blockchain is probably the only platform that can provide that kind of assurances today. And so if we start to deep dive into some of these use cases, take the simplest one that we talked about, going back again to misinformation on the internet, say politicians that have a platform, and I think there's so many email flyers that go out today around one person saying X or saying like, hey, this candidate has been supporting these views, which are just horrible. Look at the terrible things they've said, or now and also in the past. Blockchain can be a great answer, right? So if you have verification services that can sit behind each piece of content, and anyone can verify whether that political candidate didn't actually endorse those things, did actually approve that content, you have a very strong signal into the veracity of the content being shown to you, and also the veracity of the content that others are kind of providing as attacks on other candidates. And so again, it's a big problem with respect to infrastructure, because the infrastructure has to scale to support that kind of verification. And there's so many different platforms out there, so many billions of users that are viewing content on different news platforms, on social media. It does take a new type of infrastructure that we believe Aptos is really, really well suited for. It's highly scalable. It's got that fast finality. It continues to evolve with respect to developer needs. And I think as this use case starts to evolve over time, we'll start to build some of the standards in place that make it easier and easier, as well as the APIs and the backend infrastructure for these types of services to provide ultimately, that kind of control and ownership back to everyone who's a content creator out there, which is essentially all of us.
Yeah, definitely. You bring up really good points in that, all of this could theoretically be used with decentralized architecture, and maybe the infrastructure isn't there yet, and Aptos is, part of this wave that makes it possible. Because kind of how I think about it is, yeah, that would be awesome to put the models, the data, the compute, have that be decentralized for these AI systems and offer the same user experience as like an OpenAI or a Google Bard or whatever. But until that is possible, the competitor is just going to be way better, right? Like I'm going to ask, if I'm going to ask something of algorithm and it takes 5 minutes to compute, it costs me 14 cents to get the information. That doesn't sound as good of a user experience. It's just a few seconds and getting it instantly. So until we get to the same user experience as we're used to, I think it's going to be very hard for these systems to get adopted, because we care about this stuff, and probably everyone should care about the decentralization of this data, and for all the reasons that you said. But at the end of the day, I think maybe most users are just using what's cheap and fast.
100%. I mean, our in the blockchain space, our competition is really, it's not each other. It's really the cloud infrastructure that exists out there. We have to be able to provide services that are higher utility, and also at least on par, if not better, with respect to the system characteristics of the user experience, right? So I can't, if I'm using Amazon to check out and buy something, it can't take me a minute. It can't cost me $1 to do that every single time. If I'm posting something on Instagram or TikTok, I can't, wait 10 seconds for that to happen, right? That's going to kill the user experience and kill the journey. So agree that it's really the infrastructure that kind of needs to make that leap forward and support that scale and that latency that we all love on the internet, and that's been tuned for decades and decades to bring us, to bring the 5 billion people that use the internet, actively. That hasn't happened obviously for blockchain yet, and a lot of the reason is because of the infrastructure holding us back in those places.
Yeah, that's super interesting to hear you compare yourself more to the traditional cloud providers, the public cloud providers, as competitors, as opposed to, I mean, Ethereum and Bitcoin and others, right? Like, they're more so allies than competitors. The real competitor is, Google, AWS, which ironically also, you work closely with the deploy servers, et cetera. But, now as a layer on top to maybe keep them a little bit more accountable and how, these systems are set up. So yeah, that's super interesting to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, I mean,
I guess,
sorry, Leo, if I want to, I would love to actually dive on this topic a little bit as well. I mean, I think cloud providers, I mean, they also provide great services out there, right? So we do partner with Google, we do partner with Microsoft and AWS as well, because they provide amazing infrastructure for building decentralized services. It's amazing to have the idea that everyone can run server in their basement and provide amazing uptime, the ability to switch out machines whenever we need to upgrade, or also have massive backups in place. But if we want a reliable infrastructure to build on that supports decentralization, I think cloud providers are definitely, you know, a good place for many of the services to reside. And you know, I think of, you know, we're, in some sense we are competing, but at the same time we also are augmenting their suite of portfolio products. So many of these cloud providers will offer things like, you know, BigQuery or you know, Amazon, sorry, AWS Athena and other, you know, MySQL services, database services. I would think of blockchain to be another one of those services that is offered more as a decentralized platform as opposed to a centralized platform that serves different kinds of use cases than those are traditionally used for. So, you know, it doesn't mean that the Web3 will be great for everything, right? There's definitely cost trade-offs as you bring up. The ability for a centralized server to store data in 3 replicas or 5 replicas that is using Reed-Solomon encoding and compression and keeping those costs extremely cheap for some things versus a blockchain service where, you know, validators, you know, are going to be hundreds of copies. And that's that, from a cost perspective, that's just going to be always multiple factors higher. And so that trade-off will always exist for users to pick from, but there's a suite of services that make a lot of sense where that cost trade-off is absolutely worth it. And we, you know, we need to, you know, our job is to, of course, identify those use cases. I think AI being a great one and control of one's data being a great one, where those services make sense to reside. And then for other services, which are either, you know, those things are not a priority, or maybe again, content itself doesn't necessarily need to reside on the blockchain. Content verification services, as well as hashes of the data or any kind of other provenance can be stored on the blockchain. Those are reasonable trade-offs to make, I think, for all of us to consider in this space.
Yeah, that makes sense. And you're building on top of existing infrastructure. Like, what? There's no reason to not not make use of all the advances that have come in cloud computing. And it sounds like, you know, this is also almost like diversifying the risk of any potentially like any one cloud provider going down, for example. And you know, making sure that these systems have the uptime that they need. So yeah, that's a very interesting perspective on how this can be complementary. And yeah, definitely hear you on the use cases. I feel like it's a trope to say we can put everything on the blockchain, and you know, maybe in the future, but definitely not now.
Right.
Yeah, and you know, along these lines, you know, I want to transition to a little bit of a hard question. But you know, I'm sure you've thought about this a lot. But you know, the network downtime that Aptos has had recently. You know, just want to hear your perspective on, you know, what happened, and you know, what were the learnings that came from it, and what should we expect in the future?
So it's a great question. So I think, again, comparing to cloud services typically have, you know, three nines of uptime, 99.9%, and there is outages that happen even at the best, you know, internet companies in the world. I was at Meta, and I was involved in my fair share of outages as well. I think the way to think about this is not whether, like, you know, any system will have 100% uptime. I think that's just not reasonable expectations for any software technology that has any changes going into it, or it has reliabilities and dependencies that are not 100%, you know, there all the time. Our job as programmers is always going to be twofold. One is we need to have better preventative practices in place. I think, you know, Aptos has some of the most strict release cycles possible. There are 2 reviewers for every code commit. There are massive amounts of integration tests, as well as unit tests and what we call cluster tests that are run for every single commit. There's also something called the nightly tests, which run even more, spin up clusters of machines, run even more complicated tests with respect to Byzantine fault tolerance, denial of service attacks, and kind of also just general correctness with respect to compatibility. There's security tests that go on, and so on and so forth. It will not catch all the bugs, right? We're always going to be trying to reach into a space which cannot be 100% captured, but you can do your best to kind of capture, you know, 99.9% or 99% of the use, you know, the possible most likely situations that are going to happen, and some things will slip through. What's really important is how quickly do you respond to these? Do you have the right tooling in place? Can developers get together and triage problems quickly, find the issues, and resolve them alongside the operators that ultimately maintain the network? And so, really proud of the folks that, you know, once there was an issue determined, you know, transactions were not making their way through, being able to get together and triage with different developers in different disciplines into a very tricky non-determinism, you know, a bug. That's like one of the biggest fears we always fear as programmers, because determinism is easy. If I see the repeatable thing happening over and over again, it's easy to go fix that bug, roll out a change, and kind of address it. The hardest part is when things are changing every single time. Those are the trickiest most challenging things, you need to isolate, like, is this a problem that's happening, because of the hardware? I often saw at Meta, like, common, not a common thing, but a thing that was possible was the same software being deployed to multiple nodes, and we were running, the same software on hundreds of thousands of machines. It could be a simple thing like the machine has a corruption, like there's a memory corruption, there's a Linux, there's a kernel that's not acting properly. It's just improperly configured, and so isolating. Okay, is it a particular machine? Is it the same software version that's running? Again, in a decentralized environment, it could be different versions of software, and then kind of isolating down smaller and smaller. The challenge is very much detective work, figuring out now this is the smallest use case I can find, reproduce, start looking into code along, that touches those code paths, tooling that touches those things, and then finally ultimately identifying and rolling out the change and the fix that is appropriate for this particular bug. And I think like this group of folks that came together to make it happen was extremely efficient, as efficient if not more than kind of what I've seen in my days at Meta. I think reflects the kind of strong quality of developers that are working this project, able to find a code bug that happens in very, very unusual circumstances, and then roll out that change, and then ultimately, end up in a situation where there's no loss of transactions, there's no forking of the network, there's no loss of history, and every transaction that was delayed makes their way through, and I think that's a pretty good outcome. We obviously want to improve those practices, so figuring out what tooling can be more useful in the future, figuring out more preventative measures for this particular class of issues that can come up is something that's already on many people's minds and being discussed. And I think a plan will be rolling out in that space. But this is a great, I think, great example of how we in the industry should be thinking about bugs that it will inevitably happen. We need to respond quickly. We need to make sure that developers are well trained and able to identify their issues in the code, and then operators are ultimately able to roll out extremely fast with respect to coming to consensus on what the plan is. What's the mitigation? What's the ultimate fix? Also, is there going to be any loss of functionality or any loss of transactions that are going to be communicated to the community? And in our case, again, we are very, very pleased to see that none of those things happened. It was just merely delay of transaction processing, even though it was non-determinism in the code path.
Yeah, and one thing I'll note is that probably took less time for Aptos to come back up than like one full Ethereum transaction to be confirmed. Right?
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, this is super interesting to think about. And I am, I'm not a Bitcoin maximalist, obviously, being here, but I do value kind of like the ethos or approach that they take to development and kind of like the politics that go into it. So it's very interesting to hear, you speak about kind of like the opposite contrast of that. So, on Bitcoin, there's this, and again, there's obviously no one saying, what other than Satoshi, I guess, what, Bitcoin should be. But there's this idea that, Bitcoin will get to version 1 and then it'll be static, no more changes. Do you see like maybe some version of that or some spectrum of that for Aptos?
I think it's possible, but I feel like we're really, really far away from that just as an industry. In terms of innovation, like, this year alone, Aptos is rolling out or rolled out, 6 releases already, and on the 7th one for the end of the year. And every single release came with major feature improvements with respect to latency and scalability and cost, and new primitives for cryptography in the zero knowledge space, and also improvements just generally for system and infrastructure upgrades. And I can see that if we were to pause and say like, look, this is the version of the protocol, we're done with it. I think that we would not be able to kind of reach the goals of mass adoption that we just talked about earlier. In order to compete with these cloud services that are providing, usefulness for those application developers, we got to continue to innovate and push in all these areas. Scalability, latency, performance, defining differentiating features that allow us to get more and more use cases on Web3 on decentralized infrastructure, so that we can address these problems that just traditional infrastructure cannot. I don't think we're there yet, and I don't think we'll be there for some period of time. And so we need to keep iterating and improving, and that's something that Aptos is really, really good at, and something that we're going to continue to drive forward on.
Yeah, definitely. And along the same lines of what you're saying, I'm at a conference now, and the topic that's popular is or it's in vogue, it's real world assets and how do we get there. And also the flip side of that coin is the financialization of crypto assets like Bitcoin ETF, for example. And famously, Larry Fink has said that Larry Fink, BlackRock, head of BlackRock, is saying that essentially Bitcoin is is too expensive and too slow for it to be massively adopted, right? So these are like real issues that these large financial institutions are looking at and need to be solved. Otherwise, we're not going to move forward, and this is not going to get adopted. And I know, for example, y'all are working with some of these. Or at least in use cases like these to get adopted, and it's interesting to hear, yeah, because the reality of it is, Bitcoin and ETH, they move more slowly and are a little bit more conservative. But if so, then the adoption is just not going to come because it's just the tech isn't there yet.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, real-world assets is also a really interesting topic. I mean, I definitely see a lot of these large firms are dipping their toes in the water, seeing tokenization of assets happening at Aptos across different enterprise players. Some of the largest asset managers in the world are thinking about that, and it's really interesting and exciting. It's definitely going to take some time. I think this is not just a technology problem. This is also a regulatory legal compliance challenge. I think especially for the enterprises that have large traditional businesses in the space. But we're definitely happy. We're excited about it, and I think we all believe that the future of blockchain really is finance. It's just going to be an area that does take a little bit more time to play out. I think we actually just published a blog post this morning. Actually, not we, but sorry, the Aptos Network published a blog post this morning about how the future of finance looks on Aptos and how both traditional enterprises as well as developers are kind of pushing forward on all these different angles, taking advantage of a platform that can support their use cases.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the most interesting one is going to be programmability, right? Once we open up all these financial products that already exist to the same programmability that we have with, Bitcoin, ETH, APT, et cetera. I think that's a huge unlock that I feel like we don't even know the repercussions of yet.
Couldn't agree more.
Um,
I mean, the ability for decentralized finance to take different types of decentralized protocols and then for anyone to stitch them together in a way that enables things that are just not possible through kind of traditional systems, right? I can't combine, my a mortgage I might have at one company with a purchase from a money market fund in another, and how do I increase my exposure to those things? Is those APIs, those interfaces are just not available. The centralized infrastructure makes all things possible and composable, and having them on a platform that supports more and more of these use cases because the costs are cheaper, because the infrastructure can support very similar things to other databases, is I think the key for that.
yeah, definitely. So I know you only had 30 minutes, so definitely want to be respectful of your time. So any parting thoughts or any closing statements you want to give?
I think just going back to the topic of AI a bit, we are, I think, in a situation where AI has definitely pushed the envelope in terms of its ability to impact the way we think about new content being generated, think about how our lives are being shaped and changed by how we generate content. And as that comes alongside, the interesting challenges around how credit is given in that space, how misinformation is spread, and also other ethical challenges in the AI space, I think, are ultimately going to be solved by the ability for an immutable ledger that supports scale, finality times, and can work with every single large media platform out there, as well as individual, is going to be really key to the success of that, both AI in the future, as well as a big unlock for a really important use case for blockchain in the coming years. So I think we should all stay tuned, stay excited about this, and of course watch Aptos for the developments and how we partake in this area.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for that. And always a pleasure speaking to you, Avery, and look forward to see what else is coming out of this. And for folks out there, we're, don't want to release too much info, but we'll be launching a AI product soon that you'll be able to we'll work on Aptos. And yeah, Avery, I can share with you a little bit more about that. But yeah, excited. And thank you so much for joining. And thank you everyone that joined as well.
Thanks, folks. Bye.
Thank you, everyone.